Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an Airbus pilot, and today we are going to have a look at the failure scenario number 3 in the ToLiss A340-600, and that is the rejected takeoff due to an engine failure prior to V1. So let's go inside where it's a little bit more quiet over here, and first of all talk about the rejected takeoff, and then we are going to execute the scenario and put all of that in action. So, generally a rejected takeoff should be made depending on different circumstances, depending on your airspeed. Below 100 knots, the decision to reject the takeoff may be taken at the captain's discretion, depending on the circumstances. The captain should only consider discontinuing the takeoff if any ECAM warnings or cautions are activated. Now, above 100 knots and below V1, rejecting the takeoff is a more serious matter, particularly on slippery runways. It could lead to a hazardous situation if the speed is approaching V1. At these speeds, the captain should be go-minded, and very few situations should lead to the decision to reject the takeoff, which are fire warning or severe damage, sudden loss of engine thrust, malfunctions or conditions that give unambiguous indications that the aircraft will not fly safely, and any ECAM alert. Exceeding the EGT red line or nose gear vibrations should not result in the decision to reject a takeoff above 100 knots. In case of tire failure between V1-20 and V1, unless debris from the tires have caused serious engine anomalies, it is far better to get airborne, reduce the fuel load, and land with a full runway length available. Now, a rejected takeoff can lead to serious situations, especially at high speed. Remember that takeoffs are not usually rejected because the pilot feels like they want to do it, but because of serious situations taking place. And some factors that can distract from a successful rejected takeoff could be tire damage if the brakes are worn or not working correctly, brakes not being fully applied, errors in gross weight determination, incorrect performance calculations, incorrect runway lineup technique, which might have used more runway than you are supposed to use. For example, in the ToLiss scenario number 3, this is what we get for our lineup. Now, assuming that we would have gotten from November over here, this would have been a serious waste of runway over there. Correct lineup would have gotten you lined up like 50 meters further to the back, with a stop margin that is often close to a couple of meters only. A lineup like this could result in some serious trouble. Now, you can see that a lot of factors could potentially have an impact on the rejected takeoff, so it is pretty important that we focus on the procedure itself once the decision to reject the takeoff has been made. Now, the time for decision making is limited, and that's why Airbus has designed the ECAM so that any warnings that come through are actually important ones that would verify the reject or the decision to reject. Now, let's go ahead and say that we have decided that we are going to reject the takeoff. What is the technique? So the captain is going to call stop. And this is the only time, according to Airbus SOPs, where the captain becomes pilot flying without announcing I have control. So when the captain calls stop during the takeoff, he immediately becomes the pilot flying. Simultaneously, move the thrust levers to idle and select the maximum available reverse thrust. The first officer is going to check and announce reverse green and check and announce decel, monitor the auto brake, and cancel any audio alerts. Once the aircraft is stopped, things are going to get a little more interesting. The reversers will be stowed, parking brakes selected on, the captain alerts the cabin crew, and the ECAM actions are ordered. At the same time, the first officer is going to notify ATC of the rejected takeoff, already open the emergency evacuation procedure on the QRH, and then perform the ECAM actions on the captain's order. The aircraft should remain stationary while the crew evaluates the situation. Now, a few comments over here. The reversers may be used at maximum reverse until the aircraft comes to a complete stop if required, but if there is enough runway available at the end of the deceleration, it is preferable to reduce reverse thrust when passing 70 knots to avoid additional engine damage. Think about a situation where you are rejecting the takeoff at, let's say, 80 knots because an airplane enters the runway at the very end of the runway. You will easily be able to stop before that. If you now run your engines in maximum reverse until the aircraft does come to a stop, even though there is plenty of distance between you and the intruding aircraft, then you may damage your engines for basically no reasons. Now, a few more words here. Announcing the deceleration, so the decel call, means that the deceleration is felt by the crew and confirmed by the speed trend vector on the primary flight display. The deceleration may also be confirmed by the decel light located down here on the A340-600. However, the decel light only illuminates when the actual deceleration is 80% of the selected rate or more, so especially on wet or slippery runways, the decel light may not always come on. Just verify that you feel the deceleration and that you see the trend vector on the speed indicator. Now, if a rejected takeoff is initiated and maximum auto brake decelerates the aircraft, the captain has to avoid pressing the brake pedals, which may affect the deceleration if the auto brake disengages, and which may be a reflex action by the captain. The auto brake is inoperative if the takeoff is rejected prior to 72 knots, and the spoilers will also not deployed in that situation. The captain then has to simultaneously reduce thrust and apply maximum pressure on both brake pedals. The aircraft will stop in the minimum distance only if the brake pedals are maintained fully depressed until the aircraft comes to a stop. If the brake response does not seem appropriate for the runway conditions, full manual braking should be applied and maintained. That also refers to the basic Airbus golden rule of, if in doubt, take over manually. Finally, if normal braking is inoperative, immediately apply the loss of braking memory items, which basically tell you to turn the anti-skidder off and then try braking again. If that doesn't work, use the park and brake as required. All of that while selecting maximum reverse thrust, which we already have in this situation anyway. So, after rejected takeoff, if the aircraft comes to a complete stop using auto brake max, release the brakes prior to taxi by disarming the spoilers. Do not attempt to vacate the runway until it is absolutely clear that an evacuation is not necessary and that it is safe to do so. Alright, so let's go ahead and review the technique real quick, and then we're going to go right into this scenario. The captain is going to call stop. And always remember that you may feel the yaw of an engine failure before getting any ECAM alert, because the ECAM alert is only going to trigger once the engine decelerates through idle, which may take a couple seconds between the engine failing and the engine actually decelerating through idle, therefore triggering the ECAM. So the captain calls stop, selects the thrust levers to idle and maximum reverse. The first officer is going to check and announce the reverser indication and check and announce for deceleration. Monitor the auto brake and cancel any audio alerts. Once the aircraft is stopped, reverser stowed, park and brake on, cabin crew alert, ECAM actions order, and that's it. Alright, so that's pretty much everything there is to it with the rejected takeoff. A lot of theory here, but believe me, once we put it into action, it's quite similar to a normal landing, with the exception that you're not going to call spoilers, because that is not part of the procedures. They may or may not extend, not much you can do about it. You could only confuse yourself if you try to deal with that while decelerating and rejecting the takeoff. Okay, so here we are. Everything is done. Let's go ahead and release the park and brake, and then we're gonna go ahead and attempt a takeoff and see what's going to happen. So, are you ready? Takeoff. Manflex 65 SRS Auto Thrust Blue. Thrust set. Now let's just align ourselves with the center line over here. .100 knots, checked. Engine failure. Stop. Reverse green, decel. Attention crew on station, attention crew on station. Okay. At the same time, first officer, mayday, 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 Airbus 346, engine failure, stopping. Okay. Ecam actions. Engine 1 fail. Engine 1 master, off. Off. If damage, I do not see damage over here, but let's play safe. Engine fire, push button 1, push. So, engine fire, push button 1, push. So, thrust lever 1 idle, idle, agent 1 discharge. We do not have a fire, but doesn't matter, discharge. Is the light gonna come on? Yeah. Okay, engine secured. Well, and that's it. At this point, we now have to decide whether an evacuation is necessary. Now, common reasons for an evacuation at this point would be damage that makes it less safe to be on board the aircraft than outside the aircraft. So that could be things like smoke entering the cabin or a fire breaking out at the landing gear. Now, it will take a little bit of time for the brake temperatures to rise to their maximum, but we can see we're already at 680 degrees over there, so it is rather likely that a tire may deflate. But at this point, the emergency services should be arriving here as well, so we could contact them. That's 121-555 over here. Now, it's different on every airport. Frankfurt's 121-555. So we would talk to them and see if any fire is breaking out. Now, let's view that from the outside. Right now, do not see anything down here, so the emergency services are telling us that there is no fire breaking out. With that, it's safer to keep the passengers inside than to evacuate the passengers, because with every evacuation there is a certain risk of passengers getting injured. So we are just going to not take that risk. So what we do at this point, with these high brake temperatures, we're not gonna taxi off the runway. So start the APU, then shut the other engines down, get stairs attached to the aircraft, and deboard our passengers. Well, and then we'll see what effect the brake temperature has on the long term, why the engine failed. In any case, the plane is going to go to maintenance and probably stay there for a long time. So that's about everything there is to this. Now, should the rejected takeoff occur at a very low speed, you gotta check the brake temperatures. You're allowed to commence the takeoff up to 300 degrees. So if the brakes are staying cold, if there is, no indication that would warrant a return to the ramp, then you could consider commencing another takeoff. For example, if you had a runway incursion with another aircraft, so nothing wrong with our plane, the brakes are still rather cold because the rejected takeoff happened at low speed, then as long as the brakes remain below 300 degrees, you can commence another takeoff. Note that if you do have a brake fan installed, then a maximum of 150 degrees indicated brake temperature applies, because the brake temperature is measured at the outside of the brake disc, and the inside of the brake disc may be quite a bit hotter. So when the brake fan is activated, it just starts by cooling the outside of the brake disc, and therefore the indicated temperature may be lower than the temperature on the other side of the disc. So that's something to keep in mind over there. Alright, and that's really everything there is in this scenario. Thanks very much for watching. I do hope you liked it. As always, leave your comment and feedback underneath the video. As always, like, comment and subscribe. And if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you all again on the next one.